it was all happening very quickly. And to be honest, we rushed. We started without packing properly, and we got on the other side. We thought that there was like all this floating ice that was maybe 20 meters offshore, and we thought we'd get on the other side of it, go parallel all the way along the shore, 20 meters offshore with this ice floating around, and then bash our way through it back to land. We're so naive. We're absolutely humbled by the ice that night. It was sort of angling further and further offshore until we were miles offshore, and we were like, we don't know how far this goes. We could end up trying to go 50 miles around this. So we turned around to go back, but it had shifted, so we couldn't even get back to land. And we couldn't see land because it was foggy. So we didn't, there was no like point of reference to know, well, if we just keep going for a bit, we'll land. So we were kayaking with a completely unknown end.
In this podcast, I'm going to be exploring what it takes to live a life full of adventure and freedom. I'll be interviewing adventurers, explorers, and business owners who have set their life up to have an abundance of choice. And I'm also going to give you the high performance tips and tricks I teach my adventurepreneur clients to have the kind of life they want and be the type of person they wish they were. So if you're not already, subscribe to the show and settle in for another episode of The Freedom Project. Live your life as an adventure. Not something to be endured, but rather embraced. A challenge designed to forge you into the very best version of yourself. That is what life is. In this conversation, my guest Mark Agnew shares his secrets to a grand adventure, including the 3 components to ensure that every single adventure you go on gives you exactly what you seek, what you can learn about failure and success from 2 aborted rows across the Atlantic, what becoming the first person to kayak the Northwest Passage taught Mark about challenge, and how to find contentment in the effort and not just the outcome. Mark is an adventurer, journalist, and speaker, and in 2023 he became part of the group who were the first to cross the Northwest Passage by human power. A challenge that lasted 102 days where he was faced with polar bears and potentially catastrophic sea ice. He has a history of adventure and will teach you a ton about living life as an adventure. So please welcome Mark Agnew. So Mark, welcome to the show, dude. Pleasure to be speaking to you.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Before we get into everything that I want to chat about on the Northwest Passage and all that kind of stuff, talk to me about living in Hong Kong and how that sets up with adventure.
So I lived in Hong Kong for basically all of my 20s, and I just wanted to live somewhere that wasn't the UK. Not because I just liked the UK, but I was young and wanted to live abroad, and I thought my ticket abroad would be my rugby. So I emailed various clubs around the world, and eventually a club in Hong Kong replied, gave me like a few £100 a month for 3 months and like a sofa to sleep on while I looked for a job. And Hong Kong is mental. It's like at like 500 miles an hour. Like there's no such thing as like a couple of pints in a park run. It's either like a massive 3-day bender or an ultra marathon, and there's absolutely nothing in between. And it's just everybody there is full of energy. They're all type A. And initially, I had a great time there, but I started to explore more and more of the countryside and realized that there is a lifetime of like things to do out there in the outdoors. 40% of the country is national parks, and you think of it as just the skyline, but it's all just these beautiful mountains. The reason it's so tall is because they can't build out because it's such steep mountains, and they're as big as like Munros in some cases in Scotland, and you can get right to them from your door. You can walk and get onto a trail in 10 minutes, or you can, take a ferry and be on like a whole deserted island. So I started getting more and more into hiking. Then I got this amazing job at the South China Morning Post as the outdoor and extreme sports journalist. So I started interviewing people, and I found this huge community of ultra runners, like one of the biggest communities of ultra runners in the world. Every single weekend from about October to March, you can sign up to any one of dozens of trail races and ultra marathons. And
are those people like Hong Kongese, or are they kind of expats?
A whole combination, like probably proportionately represent like.
So it's not like people are massing there for that. It's just they find it at the same time.
Well, yeah. Do you mean people aren't traveling to Hong Kong as expats?
Purely to be an ultramarathon kind of community.
Well, yeah, people tend to like go there and then it's so like normal that a lot of people get into it. And like, what are you doing this weekend? So many people hike, and then they start to run, and then they start to do ultra marathons. So there's like a lot of like fat to thin kind of like stories from people who are like, I'd never run a 5K, and it's just so normalized. And now I'm out of Hong Kong. I'm like, I can't believe I did like ultra marathons. I probably will never do one again. Like, it ruined my knees. But it's not even like there is the community that takes it really, really seriously, and there's elite runners and people who do it regularly who aren't elite, like any sport, just like there is a rugby community there. But it's so common that it like transcends the community. So there's a race, for example, 100 kilometers, 4 or 5,000 meters of total elevation. You do it in groups of 4, and that is like 5,000 people running it, and it's like a thing to do, even if you're not an ultra runner. You could be in any group, and I did it with my work group, and we took 30 hours, and I did it with a group of friends, and we took 16 hours, and it's like I'm living in London, I'd love to do the London Marathon one day. It's like, I'm living in Hong Kong, I'd love to do 100 kilometers over these steep mountains. So that really took my like interest from like being outdoorsy to thinking about really pushing and pushing and pushing.
I presume you weren't a prop in rugby then.
Well, I was like a second row by the time I finished, and a pretty rubbish one. So I'm a terrible ultra runner.
Yeah, like rugby build, ultra running build.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't do that many. I just I'm more of a hiker, and then I got into rowing. Mm-hmm. So I was just ultra running is just like one of these communities. There's rock climbing communities. There's coastal rowing was what I got into in a big way, which makes more sense with my second row build. And there's races like 44 kilometers around Hong Kong Island and that kind of stuff, and that sort of coincided with me wanting to row the Atlantic. So I started to learn to row so I could row the Atlantic, and then I just started enjoying rowing for itself rather than as a means to an end.
Okay, so lots of people start rowing and they go, okay, I'm going to set a nice 2K time, or I'm going to be part of a chill team, or learn to scull by myself. Very few people go on a row across the Atlantic as the immediate objective.
Well, mine was the other way around. I was like, I want to row the Atlantic. I should probably learn to row.
Yeah.
Rather than like learning to row. I'd love to do this for 2 months. Initially I thought I would learn to row the Atlantic and never row again. And to be honest, I probably will never row again now. It's now that
we'll get into that, I reckon.
So and in defense of people who want to do 2Ks, if you do a really, really good 2K time, it is almost just as hard as rowing the Atlantic. It's just in a different way, like full-on effort condensed for 6, 7, or 8 minutes is just a very, very different kind of maximal effort for like very low effort for 40 days or whatever it is.
Yeah, I don't think there's a worse test that I've done in my life than including the commando test and the amount of pain you get from a 2K row time. That feeling of trying to roll around the floor whilst you're still strapped into a Concept 2 is horrendous.
Yeah. Yes, I didn't do many of them. My go-to length was 10K, but 2Ks were not my thing.
That will do. 10K will do. So rugby, I didn't realize you played a high standard of rugby.
I mean, I guess it was probably not as. I probably wasn't as good as I thought I was. Yeah, the club that paid me and gave me a bed, they were a bit annoyed when I came out there, and they were like, "You're not nearly as good as you said you were." I was like, "I don't think I said I was good." So I spent most of my time in Hong Kong going in and out of the first team and second team, and then ended up very much in the second team. But as I took it very seriously at school. At school, I did some representative stuff and. Went on to uni, took it seriously. But I look back, we'll get on to, I guess, what I know now about what I enjoy. I had to really examine what I enjoy about sport to get the most that I could get out of the Northwest Passage. And I realized that it's like the camaraderie that is most important to me. The experiences are amazing, and they're made even better by sharing them. And I wish I knew that when I was playing rugby, because I thought I was competitive, winning, driven to compete, and as a result, after school and then after uni, I just got more and more frustrated when I wasn't picked in the first team, and it would annoy me every time. And I sort of felt a bit embarrassed to be in the second team. and I consider being made captain or something, like a poison chalice, because they never promote the captain up to the first team. Um, and now that I look back and I realize that actually it didn't matter to me about being the best. It mattered to me about doing it with people I care about. So at uni, a lot of my friends were in the second team. And if I realized that about myself then, I would have had a much better time, because I wouldn't have just been frustrated when I wasn't in the first team, and I would have just enjoyed what an incredible team we had. And it was ridiculous. We won the cup, we won the league, and I was just annoyed that I wasn't in the firsts. And then same thing happened in Hong Kong a bit. So, and I think if I'd known that now, I probably would have changed clubs earlier, where a lot of my friends were at a different club and just like enjoyed playing in the second team, rather than like, it's ridiculous I cared so much about. It's not even like I wasn't being picked to play for Scotland. It's like being picked to play in the first team in Hong Kong. I don't know why it mattered to me so much. And I couldn't see that what I really wanted was to play with my friends.
It's funny how we almost need those experiences, though, because you can't realize that unless you have all that kind of negative emotion build up. Like that emotion is salient in some way. It's like saying, look here, there's something for you to find out here. But if you don't have the kind of negativity, then you don't necessarily find it.
Yeah, well, it was like it's like after the Atlantic, I spoke to some like sports psychologists, and they gave me the language to like understand that, and I was like, it suddenly makes sense. Like, what they were telling me, I already knew, but I'd never like been able to articulate, and it just completely changed how I framed sport. But that was after I stopped playing rugby, so too late for that, but in time for the Northwest Passage.
Yeah. So you mentioned there, or hinted at, the idea of Atlantic crossings. When did that appear on the horizon as a potential idea?
So just as I was leaving university in 2013, a friend of mine, Stuart Kinnaird, he sent me a link with a video to people rowing the Atlantic. It was like, let's do this. And I was like, well, absolutely, let's do it. And I was incredibly naive into like, we were like, oh, we'll graduate in June, we'll take a month to party, then we'll, start training and fundraising, and we'll do it in December, 5 months down the line. But we were so naive to the extent of the planning and the fundraising that it really takes to get one of those off the ground. And it wasn't until 2016, when I was already in Hong Kong and he was still living in the UK, that we found this guy who was like, it was like a pay per place. So he was saying, I'll row the Atlantic, buy a spot on my boat, which makes it cheaper, much, much logistically easier, because we don't have to like spend all that time planning. We can just turn up and row. And we thought that was absolutely perfect. And he'd also set this record or that record, so he said, so it made sense for us to join. And it just went disastrously wrong. It just went so wrong. The newspapers have articles going back to the 90s calling him Captain Calamity. But by the time I found out about that, I was already like, well, financially, but also like emotionally very, very committed. And when you're emotionally committed, you find ways of rationalizing whatever you want to rationalize. So if we asked a question, we'd believe his answer, even if the truth was staring us in the face. And we finally started, and we got about 42 hours in before we were helicoptered off.
What happened?
And well, so the first sort of day and night, and then subsequent day were going fine, and we were going very fast. The reason we thought we were going to break the world record was because we were in a multi-hull boat, like shaped like a catamaran, which meant we could surf down the waves better. But that was also used in a way as like an excuse, I suppose, for a lot of like shortcomings. Why don't we have waterproof hatches? Well, we're multi-hull, so we'll surf down the waves. The waves won't break over us. We don't need waterproof hatches. Why don't we have proper safety lines? Well, we're multi-hull, we're more stable. We don't need safety lines like they do in a mono-hull. So we just tied like ropes around our waist. Why do we only have like 1,000 calories per person per day? Well, we're a multi-hull, we'll be more efficient. We won't like burn as many calories. That one in particular, we had a big fight about, because I was like, I'm not a multi-hull.
Yeah.
I was like, the boat might move quicker, but I wouldn't. So he let me bring like, I just went to the spa and brought whatever I could that was like high in calories that wouldn't perish, olive oil, nuts, salami. It was like going to row across the Atlantic on this middle-class antipasti. And then in particular, the hatches that weren't waterproof were coming to fruition. The guys in the back cabin were sleeping in like 2 or 3 inches of water. And one of the guys, you're going rowing for 2 hours and you're sleeping in water for 2 hours, just getting your body's just spiraling. So one of the guys was in real trouble. And we owe him because the rest of us might have just like kept our eyes down and hoped for the best because we still were emotionally invested. So he's like sort of forced our hand, and then took the fall afterwards because he got the blame from the captain. Oh, we would have done it if it wasn't for his.
Was it a team of 4?
It was a team of 10.
10.
It was this big like multi-hull, but that night was amazing. These huge swells rolling up behind us. And when you're in an ocean rowing boat, you're staring up at them. And when you're in between them, it's this pitch black, this kind of darkness that I hadn't experienced before, where it doesn't just feel like a lack of light. It feels like the surface of the water is like sucking the light out of the air. And then in the next minute, you're on the top of the wave and the moon was so bright. It was our only source of light. It was our only source of light partly because the captain had brought like these garden solar paneled lights and one by one they got snapped off in the first about 24 hours. But it was just this incredible seascape. And even though I could see what was happening around me, I was like exhilarated, but not exhilarated like just, wow, this is where I want to be. I'm moving under my own power, completely immersed in this amazing seascape. But then, yeah, we got picked up and we're in Captain Calamity headlines ourselves by the end of the weekend.
Ideal. So how did that unfold? The guy who was going down, what was his situation? He was just getting hypothermia, or?
Yeah, well, I don't really know actually now because the boat was so big. And somebody told me that he was like urinating blood and stuff like that. But I've spoken to him afterwards, and I can't work out what he was suffering and to what extent he could just see the writing on the wall and was like, we need to get off this or we're all going to die. So to what extent he sort of exaggerated and it conditioned to force the captain's hand, which I'm glad of. And he's not like in any way pathetic. He went on to row the Atlantic. I think he's one of the oldest people to have done it. So he's like got it in him. And with his experience now and me being a bit more experienced, it's like the more experience we get, the more danger we realize we were in. So, I owe him a great deal.
Yeah, man, that the naivety that you have going into things like this, the first few times, I don't even think it matters if it's specific to that type of event. It's just when you start doing things like this, whether it's days out in the mountains or an ultra marathon or rowing across the Atlantic, because when you start doing things like this, you're so naive to the potential dangers and also like the people and the quality of people who are potentially leaders.
Yeah, well, God, I've fallen for that a few times. But like do you know the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, I feel like I've had the particularly kayaking. For people who are listening and don't know, the Dunning-Kruger effect is you're really likely to overestimate your ability if you are very inexperienced. But the more you get to know about a subject, the more you realize you don't know. It requires a certain level of like knowledge about a subject to be able to understand how much else there is for you to learn. And particularly with kayaking the Northwest Passage, which again I dived into like very late without much kayaking experience. And the more experience I got, the more insane I realized how it was that I was there with this little kayak experience. I almost got like more nervous towards the end when I was much more experienced, because I began to realize how like inexperienced I was. But in the rowing in the Atlantic, I think it was inexperienced, but it was also like how easy it is to put blinkers on when you are so determined. Like it is a skill. My dad calls it the courageous decision to have this self-awareness to like pull the plug. Like at what point this is risky. You've got to push yourself. You've got to get to the edge. But at what point do you say like this is crossing a line from the objective risk to the reckless risk? And how do you have the self-awareness to say, am I chickening out or am I making a sensible decision? If you are 200 meters from the summit of Everest and you like, this is the example my dad uses because he was close to the summit of Everest. If you're 200 meters from the summit of Everest, the bravest thing you can do is like turn around because you know it's unsafe. But that's like an impossible decision. And I just couldn't make that decision then because I was so emotionally invested in this rowing the Atlantic that I was rationalizing away so much. Well, those Captain Calamity headlines, you know what newspapers are like. Well, I'm a journalist. I have a high opinion of other journalists. And yet I managed to dismiss somehow like 20 years of articles. well, we don't need waterproof hatches. I mean, I've sailed my whole life. I know the waves come over whether you're in a multi-hull or not. Well, we're in a multi-hull, so it won't come over. 1,000 calories, like you don't need to be a scientist, but I managed to convince myself of so many things because I wanted them to be true. And
How
that's
old
the
were you
problem.
then?
2016, so mid 20s,
Okay.
24.
Yeah.
No, wait,
Okay, so we're the
25.
same age. So okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's when you really want to believe something. When you really
very
want
easily.
to,
Yeah,
like, when you've got this dream goal. I think there's really strong parallels here to entrepreneurship as well. It's like you got this business idea, you're driving and driving and driving, you're pushing, like you know there's sacrifice involved, you know you have to suffer, but at some point the writing is on the wall, and because you become so blinkered by what you want to see, you don't pay attention to it, and
yeah,
like but when you do, it's been there for years, and it's clear to see.
yeah. Exactly. It's in any walk of life that if you have something that you want to be true, then
Yeah,
you're going to find a way
relationships.
for it to be true. Yeah,
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 must be that.
exactly. Yeah,
Okay, so you got I was gonna say pulled off. Choose your words better, Tom.
yeah.
You got extracted from the boat. Like what was that moment like?
It was quite actually like physical. It was sort of like physical comedy. Well, first of all, the captain who'd been helicoptered off before and said, "Oh, I know what I'm doing here." He said, "You can pack a bag." So I mean, I put like my wallet and my phone in and a camera, and he said, "No, no, it's a helicopter, Mark. It's not going to have a problem lifting your stuff." So we packed a bit more. No, no, it's a helicopter. Don't worry about it. So I packed most of my clothes. And then when they came down, they were Spanish, so there was a language barrier, and they said like, "Leave your bags." And we thought they were saying like, um, we'll get you up, then we'll get your bags up. I went up with this big wide brim cricket hat, which then like blew down over my face under the downdraft of the helicopter. The guys watching from below said I looked like a human shuttlecock, and I was just swinging backwards and forwards, completely blind. And I smacked on like the bottom of the helicopter, and then I was pulled in. And then we started to fly away, and we all said, what about our bags?" And they were like, "What do you mean? What about your bags? We're not EasyJet here. We're picking you up." So we lost all of our passports, which meant we had to then like sit in La Gomera for not La Gomera, somewhere else in Canary. I think Canary. I can't even remember the name of the island, but waiting for like emergency passports. And thankfully, we were just sitting on the bus like into town, all completely lost with no money, only the clothes on our back, talking among ourselves, and somebody else in the bus said, "Sorry, I keep overhearing you. What happened?" We explained, and he said, "Wow, I can't overhear this and not help." So he let us stay in his apartment,
Oh,
which was very, very nice of him.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a bit of a mess. When I left the office like a few days earlier, I got this like standing ovation. Like explorer goes off to set a world record to row across the
That
Atlantic.
must be nice for the ego as well at that point.
Well, no, that was one of my friends taking the mick out of me. Like as I stood up to leave, they were like, "Good luck," and then starts a slow clap. I was like, stop it, Chris!" And like people looking over, what are they clapping? Oh God, now I've got to lead into this now, waving like a politician as I go out and everybody's clapping. It was so embarrassing. And then I was back by like the end of the weekend. People were like,
That's quick. Good
yeah,
rowing.
bloody hell, you really did set a world record. Yeah, or they thought, I thought you were going to run the Atlantic. Yeah, well,
So did
so,
I.
but yeah, so did I. um, so yeah, and it was all like easy to take and quite funny, and like obviously I was like telling the story, trying to justify it and validate myself. It's not like somebody chickened out, but it was like so binary that we would have to get off that boat, that there was no like angst about it. But then I tried to row the Atlantic again 2 years later, and didn't get much farther. And that time there was a lot of angst, and I really suffered from the fallout of that one. That was
Yeah.
tough.
Okay, so let's come back to that in a second. Surely actually what was the approach you took to rowing when you came up when you got extracted that first time and you were back on dry land? Was it a I will never do that again? Or was it I can't wait to get out with a better crew? Or something
I
else?
was, yeah, I mean, with my friend Stu, who I'd initially wanted to do it with, we were like in the helicopter and like, we're doing this again, but we're not doing it with like, we're going to organize it ourselves. Um, like I was so like the simplicity of it. I didn't really have a way of articulating why I wanted to do it, and now this reason has changed. But um, initially it was like push yourself, human endurance, find the edge, world records. But then, like as soon as we started, I realized it was the simplicity. Like it's just so simple. You're moving from A to B. You wake up, you move from A to B. You eat so you can fuel yourself to move from A to B. It sort of feels primal. There's no like trying to prioritize things or like how to get to this email later, and there's it's just like completely and utterly like back to basics, the Maslow hierarchy of needs kind of thing, and I was just so enamored by that, and so enamored by how amazing that night was. Even if it was going absolutely tits up, it was just incredible to be in the midst of that environment. That was just so incredible. So yeah, I wanted to go back.
Isn't it amazing how we desire that simplicity and the fact
Mm-hmm.
that we have everything around us, like got the heating on now, it's chilly outside, it's warm in here, it's like it's so easy, yet we crave something difficult and very simplistic. It's like the same thing as hunting, the same thing as ski touring, the same thing as like as rowing or kayaking. It's like the simplicity of it, the
Mm-hmm.
back to basics, the challenge, but also like I've got to put food in my face and travel. And that's
Yeah.
basically your requirements. There's something so compelling about it.
Yeah, it's probably to do with our like advancing Western civilization and how comfortable we're all getting that we desire something else, and you see it in the marketing of these things. They don't say come and sign up to my race and you'll see incredible views. They're all like the world's toughest this, the world's toughest that, the world's toughest this, and somehow telling people how tough it is all is a marketing campaign to get them to say, "Well, I want to do the world's toughest row. I want to do the world's toughest ultramarathon." I mean, there's so many world toughest things now. It's completely arbitrary and relative, but it's just interesting. And also, I guess there is a disproportionate amount of men doing it to women. So maybe that marketing is maybe a different marketing would like attract different like socioeconomic groups and different genders and that kind of thing. I doubt that Kenyans who are running marathons because they want to get the prize money to better their lives, I doubt the appealing thing for them is the toughness. Oh, great! I got to go do
Human
something
performance.
tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. For them, it is like a means to an end, which is something. There's a great book called Running with Kenyans, which sort of like looks at like the different motivations. One aspect of the book is like, we're all like, oh, I want to push myself, and people who grew up in incredibly tough backgrounds aren't like, oh, I seek doing marathons because I want to push myself. They are ironically doing it because they can get money and then be more comfortable.
Mm.
So it was like multi-dimensional. But for us in Britain, white men, comfortable backgrounds. Well, my comfortable background, I don't know. I can't speak for you, but there's something that's like missing from this sedentary life that clearly is being met by this explosion of world's toughest this, that, and the other thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that craving for hardship. It's so bizarre that we would crave something like that.
Mm.
Do you think about that as an evolutionary strategy? What is it that's hardwired in there? Is it just that we feel anxious if we don't do difficult things, and like that signals to us that we need to like generate food or move forwards with our life in some kind of very physical way? Like, what could that be?
Yeah, that is. I mean, I'm sure somebody out there has answered it above my pay grade. But this is like very interesting books. Running with Kenyans is what addresses it. Born to Run is another one that
Mm-hmm.
looks at our sort of like biological wired to be long distance runners. And for me, I think there's like a community aspect to it. I know some people love to do solo adventures, but I never would. I would only ever do it with people. And there's something about like friendship is one thing, but camaraderie is like another step where you have that shared suffering, shared
Yeah.
effort, common goal, unique things you've seen together
Yeah.
that is important to me.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you speak to guys and girls that have been in the military about what they miss, it's the camaraderie. And yes, there's
Yeah,
the exciting, cool shit of blowing stuff up and running around with guns and all that kind of stuff, and that's part of it. But it's a very small part. But what you miss is the blokes that you're with and the
yeah,
camaraderie, which is way deeper than a casual friendship. Because you're chat like I've always said, the way to bond people together is to do different difficult things together and inebriate yourselves together. You do those two
yes,
things, and it really binds people.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
big fan of both of them.
So, what was motivating you to do the second attempt? I know you're like, I really want to do this, but was it like, was there a difference?
That's a good question. Well, I think there probably was a difference, and it was going down a bad path because when Stu sent me that video in 2013, I didn't know that there were world records in this space. Like I didn't know that people tried to set world records. If I'd thought about it, I probably would have guessed that there are, but it's certainly not something that I thought about, and it's definitely not something. I mean, I don't know why I would have assumed that I could do it, because in world record time, I wasn't a rower. I'm not a particularly fit person, like innately. And then when we signed up to row with the Captain Calamity guy, it was for a world record. And I think I began to believe my own sponsorship pitch. So by the second time, I'm like, we're going to win the race. I want to set the record, blah, 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 all these kind of things. I was so like focused on that. And I, telling myself, well, I want to enjoy the journey, and I'd rather finish and have a good time than finish in a record thing. But like so much of it was becoming more and more about the performance and getting it done. So I had my group of friends, and for one reason or another, we never like managed to sort ourselves out and prepare. So at the last minute, I switched and called this time I entered the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge race,
Mm-hmm.
and they said there was somebody who was going in a pair, and her partner had dropped out. But at the same time, my team sort of disintegrated. So I called them, and we ended up in a boat together.
So
Wanted to
just
set
two
the
of you.
mixed, yeah, wanting to set the mixed pair world record. And yeah, so I guess my like approach became more and more about like the performance aspect of it.
And how long between between the change of team and then the departure date?
I probably changed teams like May or June, and then departed in December.
Okay.
But I was in Hong Kong, so I only came across back to the UK for 2 weeks, and we did like 5 or 6 days together, and 24 hours on the boat together, and then like the weekend just hanging out. So it wasn't very
That
long.
must be quite an intense kind of adventure sport date. Like, are you a good
Yeah,
person to
it's
spend
like, yeah,
however many
Tinder
weeks
for
with?
ocean rowers. Yeah, and we did get along. And she's a very nice woman, and it's unfortunate we didn't cross. So, and we could have been friends for life, but I haven't spoken to her since.
Okay. So,
But
right, we got to explore not anything you don't want to go into, but
well, it's just that we haven't spoken because I moved back to Hong Kong, and
okay.
but we only had this like brief time.
Yeah.
There's no fallout. I wish her all the best. But yeah, we got about 3 days in. She was really struggling with life at sea
Mm-hmm.
to the extent that she had a panic attack and it continued on through the night. And by the morning, she made the courageous decision. We were talking earlier about how difficult it is to have that self awareness, and she could have said, well, thank God I'm through that.
Mm-hmm.
We're on. But she said, look, if I go on, I'm putting myself and you in danger. So we called for a race boat to come and get her. It's 36 hours it took to get to us. And I'm just sitting there stewing in my own mind. Should I get off or should I go on solo? And initially I was like, I'm going on solo. It's going to be amazing. But we were having problems with the battery. It wasn't charging properly, um, which meant at night we were turning off quite a lot, including a thing called AIS, which makes us visible on ships' radars. So if there's two of us, at least one of us can sit out on deck and look for a ship. In fact, while we were waiting for the boat to come pick us up, we were taking hour-long shifts just to sit on deck and look at the horizon because we couldn't turn on the AIS. But if I was by myself and asleep in the dark without the AIS, the ship could run me over and I'd never know that it was there before I was dead.
Mm-hmm.
And that is obviously a reason to get off. Or was I massively exaggerating the difficulty of the AIS would cause, the risk that I was taking, and I was sort of grasping at a face-saving excuse to get off. Backwards and forwards. I just was like completely overwhelmed by the decision. And by the time the boat came, it picked her up, I got off as well. And then that decision just like ate at me. Did I chicken out or didn't I? And I still don't really know what the answer is.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I think that I now think that maybe I probably would have been fine if I'd gone on. I think that it could have been as simple as something like we were still too far north, and if we, in a few days, we got a bit further south, the solar panels could have worked a little bit better. But even with that in mind, is that crossing from that objective to that reckless risk? I don't know what the right decision was. Like, you know, I probably would have been fine. Is that good enough? I don't know. So that ate at me, and I felt humiliated, and which is ridiculous because most people weren't even thinking about it. You know, I like, you know, in your mind, you think you're the most important person, and everyone going, "Oh, remember when Mark didn't row the Atlantic twice?" And I had this idea of myself and this record setter, and I couldn't even get past the first week. So, yeah, I felt it started to just affect my confidence and self-worth and like identity well beyond the idea of rowing the Atlantic. I just felt like really flat for a long time, over a year. Just pathetic. I used to tell myself. And every time somebody rowed the Atlantic, I felt like more embarrassed. Like, look how easy it is. Pathetic. Or every time somebody would say, "Oh, you didn't row the Atlantic." Yeah, my old housemate used to do it. I'd be like, "Oh." Yeah, so that felt terrible.
Yeah, when you've used it like an external achievement or a hope of an external achievement to identify yourself and create that identity of this is who I am, this type of person I am, and that gets taken away from you, you're left with quite an absence of like what's actually there. Who am I? And it's amazing that those big questions come from something. Well, it's a big objective, but it's like those big questions need to be answered.
Well, you've just summed up very neatly something that I thought we'd get to later. But when I was trying to prepare for the Northwest Passage, I was like, I need to avoid this happening again. And what I thought the answer would be more resilience. So I started interviewing some psychologists for a book, which I'm now writing about, like how to build resilience for my Northwest Passage adventure. But it completely changed because I had one conversation with a psychologist who does a podcast called Meaningful Sports. And she pointed me to some work by Katrina Douglas and David Careless, are the two psychologists who have this work, about there's only 3 reasons why people take part in sport, according to them. 3 narratives that you tell they call them narratives, stories you tell yourself for why you take part in sport. Performance, discovery, and relationships. The performance is the outcome, the win or loss. Discovery is having new experiences. Relationships is sharing it with people. And it's not supposed to be self-help. It's just a way of understanding like the way of the world. But that was the language that immediately spoke to me. I thought, yeah, when I wanted to row the Atlantic initially, it was for discovery. I didn't want to row on a rowing machine for 3,000 miles. I wanted to be in the middle of the ocean. I wanted to see whales and stars and swells and relationships. I would never do it alone because I wanted to do it with Stu, my old friend from school. I wanted to share that experience, get to the other side, and be like we did something special together. And somewhere along the line, it became all about performance. And the problem with the performance narrative is it's utterly binary. You win or you lose. And there's no way of judging success if you lose. But relationships and discovery, if I get to the other side, I haven't done the world record, but I've had an amazing experience being immersed in nature. I've built relationships with the people I've shared that effort with. I'm free to judge success on my own terms. And even those failed adventures, when I was in those swells and the moon was casting a shadow behind us and I was there with Stu, is that not what I was looking for? Sure, okay, I would have liked to have gone on more than 2 days. But like, if that's what I now judge as my success, I got at least an element of it. You know, and so having intrinsic values is the ultimate resilience because it frees you to judge success on your own terms. And it allows you to sort of enjoy the journey and not the destination because you think, well, I'm here for relationships and I'm with the people I care about. And I'm here for being immersed in nature, which is happening now, rather than I'm here for something that's 2,000 miles away.
Yeah. Yeah, that, you know, when you hear something, you go, that clarifies 25
Yeah,
things I've been thinking about in my head. Like that is
yeah,
exactly it. And how do you build a team? Well, if one of you is going for performance and one of you is going for discovery and the other one is going for relationships, then you're all conflicting and you're all trying to achieve different things despite the
mhm,
external objective being summit that mountain. They're
yeah,
all conflicting and all different experiences, and then it also answers contingency options, and it also answers like, how do we do this? What's our strategy for attaining this? It's all a completely different experience.
yeah. Although having said that, in the Northwest Passage, I would say that I was more focused, a bit more articulate, like in specific about my like need for camaraderie, and that and other people were maybe more goal focused. But it didn't matter to me because I was like, well, if I'm here for camaraderie and he wants to be a goal, then I
Yes.
can push. But because they lead for me, some people ask when I give talks and stuff at schools, like which of those three is the most important to you? Because ultimately, I still went on to do something that was still
Mhm.
binary in the sense that we were trying to do the Northwest Passage, and they're like circular.
Mhm.
When does a friendship become camaraderie? Well, I could go kayaking up and down the Firth of Forth outside Edinburgh, but the shared goal, the performance, turns that friendship into camaraderie because we have to have a shared goal to push for that shared effort.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the experience being immersed in nature is great, but then sharing that with people makes it even greater. And then sharing that with people who you have camaraderie with,
Okay.
which you get through pushing for a goal.
Hmm.
So I guess like the goal is still important, but as a facilitator for the other two, rather than it's like a means to an end rather than an end in itself. But it has to be something that you're still 100% genuinely pushing yourself for. Because if you're not, if you're like, well, who cares if we don't do it? I'm just here for camaraderie. Well, the camaraderie won't happen because you need to be pushing and having that shared effort. So it's still like important. And one question I sometimes get is like, well, do you train less hard and feel less motivated because if you're not wanting to go? Well, no, I feel more motivated because previously I really wanted to set a world record. Now I really don't want to let down my teammates,
Yeah.
which is going to be a more like uh, a bit like a more motivator. Looking at my teammates and saying I'm pushing myself hard for them because they're pushing themselves hard for me. But we're only going to push ourselves if we have that performance like metric. And this is like going beyond what the psychologist said because she's just like this is just a framework to understand why people enjoy sport. I don't think she's maybe thought about how they interact or how they motivate people beyond
Hmm.
that. But for me, I was like, wow, I get it. Like, I'd forgotten about the other two and just focus on performance, but I still can't let go of performance. I went on an aimless adventure last year where I just kayaked down the west coast of Scotland and I climbed Munros as I passed them. And I had 2 weeks time and I was just picking as I went. Like the weather is such and such today. And it was very fun and I was immersed in nature and I did it with friends. But it wasn't that rewarding because there wasn't the performance thing. Even if it's not a world record, even if it's just let's try and get a round sky so there's an A and B finish, and then we do it together or whatever, rather than just like let's see how far we get. So yeah, what I'm saying, I guess, in a very roundabout way, is intrinsic goals make things much more powerful and gives me a great deal of contentment when we achieve them. But I still need the performance to facilitate the other two.
As you're talking, I almost viewed it like three legs of a stool. They all have to
Yeah,
be um, in proportion to each other in some way, but
yeah,
your individual psychology, mindset, biology, probably genetics, everything that makes you you determines how much stress each one needs to take, or the length of each leg of the stool, because it's almost like it's going to
yeah,
be slightly off kilter. So it's like, how do I make it personal to me, and at the same time, how do I ensure that I'm hitting these pieces and not ignoring one of them?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that makes so much sense, because if I think about myself as going into the Marines, it was like, okay, that was discovery for me, and camaraderie was in there and performance was in there, but like the main thing was discovery. Am I doing something new? Lots of other people were in there for performance and just they want to be the most elite soldier they can be, and then if I think about so many other objectives that I've gone for, it's like, okay, the like It's the discovery thing that really speaks to me, but it has to have the other two components. Otherwise, it's absent something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. If you're an adventurepreneur and you want more freedom to do more cool shit, then I want to help you do that. Every month, I take on a maximum of 3 new clients into my high performance adventurepreneur program. This is a completely bespoke, personal and deep dive program giving you complete freedom, teaching you high performance mastery. It's application and invite only, and I accept only those who are the best fit for the program. To apply for your space, head to my Instagram, Tom Foxley, Foxley, and send me a message with the word interested. So, we should probably explain what the Northwest Passage is.
Yeah, so the Northwest Passage is the Arctic route that links the Atlantic to the Pacific. For hundreds of years, Britain in particular was searching for it because they wanted to get to Asia to trade, but they couldn't go around South America because it was Spanish, and they couldn't go around Africa because it was Dutch. So they thought they'd go over North America. And in particular, in the 19th century, it became like the thing to find. And that's where all the famous stories of Franklin come from, which are now like BBC dramas called The Terror and best-selling books by Michael Palin called The Erebus. And then in the last decade or so, or since 2007, the ice has been disappearing enough that it's open long enough that somebody can maybe get all the way through without a motor or a sail, so just under human power. And that has been like the next first in a lot of in the adventure community or in the paddling community at least. So there's been rowers trying it and kayakers. And even this year, there were 2 other rowing teams attempting it. So we were in a race of some sort. But only we finished. So we became the first to kayak the Northwest Passage and the first to do it under human power in a single season. Somebody did it over 3 years, 10 years ago. And it was epic. It was unbelievable. Like, it was just crazy. It took me 103 days, starting on July the 1st to October the 11th. And by the time October came around, it was so savage. The conditions just turned they just went 180 degrees overnight. You know, we went to sleep cold and we woke up freezing, like winter had arrived. So it just never left. The other teams had stopped, particularly one because it was too late in the year and the weather was getting too bad, and we just sort of stuck it out. And which I think we could do because we were in a kayak instead of a rowing boat. Which the Inuit invented the kayaks for a reason. If it was the best boat to be up there, and they would have invented a rowing boat. It was amazing. Yeah, I don't know. I'm like, ask me a more specific question because I don't know where to start. Yeah. I'm like, there's so much.
Yeah, we're absolutely going to do that. You started that journey with the idea of like, okay, I want to balance this more specifically for me, in the idea of this is going to be more camaraderie based, more relationship based. Why not do something else that was different from that?
So, why the Northwest Passage?
Yeah, why North? That's a way better way of phrasing the question.
Yeah. I guess, things changed over time. I guess initially, I actually was first drawn to this idea before I rode the Atlantic in 2016. When I was getting into ocean rowing, I started Googling around and I found somebody who was talking about rowing the Northwest Passage. And at the time, what appealed to me was it seemed like a sort of legitimate last first. Yeah. Not last first, but like a legitimate next first. There's a lot of firsts out there which are very, very impressive and super cool and amazing adventures.
Yeah, but there's a lot of possibly. I'm the first person to climb Everest whilst wearing clown shoes.
Yeah, some of it is gimmicky, but even the ones that aren't gimmicky, that are like legitimate difficult adventures, I sometimes feel like they're only first because you're the first person to think of it.
Yeah.
The first person to try it. And the thing about this was people have been trying it. You know, it's not like it's not like I just thought of this and I was the first person to try it and the first person to finish it. So it felt like something that aspect of it being a first made it like appealed to me from the competitive point of view, but also like the history point of view, because I love all those polar history books. Shackleton,
Mm-hmm.
Scott, Amerstone, they've inspired me, and I love them. And I wish I was born back then and I could do a first. And then I found one. I could be like part of this story. I could be the end of the last chapter of the Northwest Passage, and that chilled out a lot because, firstly, I moved away from the performance part.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because I grew up a little bit, and I look back on that and I cringe. And thirdly, trying to listen to some of the stuff that was said in Black Lives Matter, I was sort of thinking, I have a platform. I'm a journalist. I will get more of a platform through the achieving this. But like, what sort of message am I putting out there? Like going and doing a last great first, quote unquote, in Antarctica is great, but doing it in a place that has like indigenous population who have a complicated relationship with the other firsts, making myself an extension of that legacy. They probably don't care, and it's not like I suddenly became woke and I'm not inspired by like the stories anymore. I just thought of more a nuanced like approach to that aspect of like the inspiration that I had was I just chilled out basically a little bit on like being like, oh, I'm going to be like Amerstone. I'm obviously nothing like Amerstone. But then moving more towards like I guess then the momentum was building and I became interested in the region, from the history, from both aspects, from like the wildlife, how cool it was. So those intrinsic motivations came in more and more, and it was still like a cool first and a difficult first. So that's going to build into camaraderie, as we spoke about before. So why the Northwest Passage? I guess initially what drew me towards it was the history of it, and by the time I got there, it was the other intrinsic motivators mixed in with the history of it.
Okay, so I'm completely poorly educated in the subject. Talk to me about the history in terms of the indigenous population.
Well, it wasn't like anything specific, but it's just it was like the Victorian era. We're going to places and sort of claiming them and naming them. King William Island and Victoria Island and Banks Island, and there's people who already lived there. And modernity came, and in many ways, I'm sure people appreciate it because modernity, the access to global trade, cut down famine, for example, in the region, but it also brought disease. And there's still going out there. You can see the legacy of it in Pond Inlet, where we started. There's an alcohol-free zone because there's local population struggle with generational trauma and quick access to alcohol that hadn't come from their culture before. I'm not like educated enough on it to speak in an authority, but there is like, it's not as simple as either we went there and destroyed their culture or they benefited entirely from us. Like it's for them to say, but I thought it wasn't for me to say, this is the last great first. I'm an extension of Amerstone and Franklin and Frobisher and Captain Cook. I just thought that I should probably chill out on that because it's embarrassing and possibly problematic.
Yeah, could be cool.
I mean, I wrote an article in the newspaper in Hong Kong called "The Last Great First," and I read back on that and I like want to melt.
Yeah, but surely, like, I appreciate that, and I've done a lot of things that I cringe back at looking at it. But there's also the kind of self-compassion I think you have to have there of I only
I'm
knew what
not.
I knew at the time.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not like flagellating too much, and also I'm not saying that like it still isn't inspiring to me. I'm now like I want to go back and read the first books that I read about Franklin and about Amerstone and compare my experiences. And while we were up there were like a couple of specific places where I was like, wow, we're having the same experience as Captain Parry did when he was shipwrecked here. So it was still important to me. It's not like I've woken up and just like suddenly feel humiliated to like be part of the legacy of the British Empire. But like, it's just, I just didn't think that it was appropriate to be like, why do you want to go to the Northwest Passage? I would have said in 2016, because I want to be like Franklin. Yeah, and I don't know if that is Black Lives Matter or growing up or failing to row the Atlantic and coming up with more intrinsic values. Combination of all, probably.
Yeah, I think we are channeling aspects of those adventures before, and that's why
Yeah,
doing things that are daring and great are important, because they set the example, and you like, to a degree, you are being like those people that you idolize and that you look up to, and whose achievements that you respect, because that's
yeah,
like inbuilt into you as a human. Like, we will have that like gene ready to turn on almost.
yeah.
But there's a nuance to it, like you're
Yeah.
saying.
There was one point where we had this incredibly difficult few hours where this ice was all around us, and it was like flowing like lava. It was like spilling over itself and colliding and clashing. And we were so close to shore, like, within a mile. We just couldn't get there. It was 6-7 hours of this, and we were trying to land on a place called Fury Beach. It's called Fury Beach because in 1825, a guy called Captain Parry and his boat, the Fury, got shipwrecked there, and in an attempt to save their boat, beached the boat, and it was all the ice and the wind. The ice was being moved by the wind and the tide, and it was absolutely churning their boat. And then they left the boat there and they went back on a different boat. And that beach became famous because all the other subsequent expeditions, if they got shipwrecked, they would try and get to Fury Beach because they knew that there was the boat there with the supplies that they could survive on until they were rescued. And there's still artifacts there to this day. And West, my teammate in particular, but also me, were very excited about landing on Fury Beach and maybe finding an artifact and being in a place that's so specific and famous to, like, the story of the Northwest Passage. And when we were in this ice and it was pushing us past Fury Beach, and it became clear that we were not going to be able to land there, you could see West was a little bit disappointed. Like, oh, I just wanted to land on Fury Beach so much. And I said, well, we're spending 6-7 hours trapped in the wind. We were trapped in the tide of the wind and ice. I promise you, we're having a more authentic Captain Parry 1825 experience than you'd ever get by landing there and finding a trinket and taking it home. This is, if you want to feel connected to the stories
That's an experience.
you experienced, then we are having probably exactly the same experience. And that was a fascinating day, one that was about a third of the way through. Maybe less, but even at the end, we all sort of said, "What do you remember?" We're like, "Remember the day we defied death in the off Fury Beach?" That's the day that we all look back on, and we're like, "That was the best day." I was telling my wife about it, and she said, "Why are you being so negative?" And I was like, "Oh no, I'm not being negative. This is great stuff. We had such a fantastic time, almost dying."
Those are the stories that everyone tells. It's the type 2 fun.
Exactly.
Like, it's
type 2 fun.
type of story that people tell on this. Like,
Yeah.
like the thing that you focus on probably isn't that arrival. It's what other people want to hear about. But the thing that's meaningful to you is the experience. That probably because you got the camaraderie in there, you came together at that point. You were doing something difficult. Yeah, like it's all there. What's it like leaving for an adventure like that? That moment you kind of kick offshore. What's that like?
Well, that was. It was very rushed. We got a lift to the floe edge where the ice ends, and then those two guys stayed overnight, and then we got up in the morning and we had to pack, and it took us hours to pack because it was like the first time we were rushed, and we didn't want them to wait for another night, and so it just felt like it was all happening very quickly, and to be honest, it was. We rushed. We started without packing properly, and we got on the other side. We thought that there was like all this floating ice that was maybe 20 meters offshore. And we thought we'd get on the other side of it, go parallel all the way along the shore, 20 meters offshore with this ice floating around, and then bash our way through it back to land. We're so naive. We're absolutely humbled by the ice that night. It just like, it was sort of angling further and further offshore until we were miles offshore. And we were like, we don't know how far this goes. We could end up trying to go 50 miles around this. So we turned around to go back, but it had shifted. So we couldn't even get back to land. And we couldn't see land because it was foggy, so we didn't, there was no like point of reference to know, well, if we just keep going for a bit, we'll land. So we were kayaking with a completely unknown end, and somebody warned me about this before I went, but I couldn't picture it, and maybe I can't explain it, but perspective becomes completely messed up. We'd come around a corner of ice and we'd say, there are the mountains in the distance. We can finally see land. And then we'd realize it was a piece of ice 15 meters away. And that happened so many times. At one point I saw like 10 polar bears standing on ice that we were going straight towards, but they're way in the distance. This is like, I wasn't worried. I wasn't even sure if I should bother telling everybody because they were just little, they were specks. I was like, God, there's 10 polar bears there. That's amazing. And then I realized there was 10 seagulls about 10 meters away. I can't explain how confusing that is.
that
I heard a story
before.
before.
So long looking for reference.
No, it's like it's just that because everything is white, and some of the icebergs are enormous, and some of them aren't, and you can't tell which are close and which are far and which are enormous and which are small, and then everything becomes relative to that. And and I heard a story before I went about a guy stalking a polar bear and then finding out it was a fox about 20 meters away. And I was like, I don't understand. Well, my dad told me a story about him being in Greenland, thinking that they were going to arrive at the base camp in the afternoon and then walking for another 5 days. And with the mountains just not getting any bigger. It's so difficult to understand that because I could not understand that whatsoever. And it happened again. I once saw a polar bear eating a seal, and then it turned out to be a seagull eating a fish. And like, it's so confusing. And we just keep coming around corners. And then finally we made it back to the like semi-permanent ice rather than shifting ice, the one that's like you can camp on, and we got skidied over. And there was an Inuit camp there, and they pulled us up on shore. We were still panicked at that point. It was like 2 a.m. in the morning, and we were just being completely schooled. And we were asking them, like, can you skidoo us back to the cabin, which is where we were staying? And they said no. And the captain there, the guy who's leading their camp, just without even looking at us, sort of said, the floe edge is a hard place to be. If you can't handle it, you shouldn't be here. And I was like, fair enough. I mean, you're right, because we've just been absolutely humbled.
Which day was that? Was that day one?
That was literally starting. And then we didn't want to go back in the water because we didn't know what the ice was doing. So we strapped kayaks around our waist and just towed it over the ice. And we started following these bear footprints because I thought it will know what solid ice is. At one point, the bear footprints sort of turned left just for 10 meters in a bit of an arc. And I wonder why the polar bear turned. At that moment, I just cracked straight through the ice into the Arctic Ocean below me. Fortunately, I managed to sort of stay with my head above it. Asked the other guy, I said, don't come over here. He'll fall in as well. Push the kayak towards me. So they pushed the nose of the kayak towards me. I held onto it and they pulled me out. And then we continued on. And then we got back to the cabin and we waited for the ice to change, which took like 2 weeks. So we sat in this cabin and we tried another like 3 times, full on pack, go, this is the day, attempt to, and we wouldn't get, and this time we wouldn't try and go around the other side of the ice and 50 miles out. So we'd go and we'd sort of explore, and they were fantastic trips. Like they were in the beautiful, beautiful like sun, pristine water, no wind, and we're like in the middle of all this ice, and we know we can get back to the cabin now because we're not going to go to the other side of it. Huge icebergs. It was really one of like, it was absolutely fantastic. Something you pay millions, thousands of pounds like for a kayaking trip like that. So like, I guess you're starting, what's it like starting? Well, the first time we started was rushed and it was so much was going on. I didn't have like a chance to appreciate it. And then we started like another 4 times. And then it became weird because you'd be starting and you're trying to like mentally prepare, but you're also not sure if you're really going to go more than like 5 miles up the shore and back again. Mm. So, and I don't know when like the realization was on the 6th time that we started or whatever it was. Right, we've gone 10 miles now. We've gone 15 miles. Right, we're not turning back. So it was sort of like exciting. A slow boil.
Yeah. That first moment of like, we're actually doing this now.
We're not turning around now. Yeah.
Okay. What's navigating in that environment like?
So we had like Garmin GPSs, mm-hmm. and you could put a waypoint in. And to begin with, we didn't really use waypoints. We were just following the shore and using maps. I was the youngest by 20 or 30 years. I think I was a bit better at using the GPS. And then come about 300 miles from halfway, I started pointing out that maybe we could shave off time if we went to this waypoint instead of following the shore and shave off time here. So I think in the last 300 miles into halfway, where we stocked up with food, we may have saved us a couple of days by doing that. So from then on, it became like the standard. We set a waypoint. We
Is it
cut corners.
challenging
We go
to
in straight
navigate
lines.
though because of moving ice?
Well, the ice. I mean, you can't. You're not really navigating when you're in the ice because you're just trying to get out of the ice. Like the ice is not something we were familiar with. It wasn't always there. Once we were past the ice, like 3 days after starting, we didn't see it again until that crazy day where it was all around us and moving very dynamically. And that, you don't have a choice of like following a line. You're just trying to like pick holes
Is it just get
and
out?
follow leads. Yeah, it's get out or get through to the other side. You can see open water and you're trying to get to it.
I imagine because your head's pretty low as well, you don't get much of a
difficult.
perspective as instead, like even compared to standing at around 6 feet.
Yeah, well, yeah. On that day, we did get out of the kayaks onto and stood on the ice at one point because it was getting insane, and two ice floes had like collided and almost crushed Eileen and I. And by a miracle, because the curve of the bottom of our kayak is round, as it pinched us, it slipped. It just scooped us up, and that was like that squeaky bum time. And so we all just got out and just stood there. And we were still moving at like 3.5 miles an hour standing on this ice because it was just like this melee, and we just couldn't see anything, and we just didn't see any open water around us. And about 20 minutes later or half an hour later, God, it's difficult to remember how long it could have been hours. I think it was probably 20 to half an hour. And it began to spread out again. So we like relaunched the kayaks and made like a desperate bid for shore. But I found navigating very mentally draining because particularly when you're doing a crossing or when there's fog. So it's like, Eileen steering behind me, a little bit left. Okay, we're off the line now, a little bit right. So it like interrupts any flow you have with like conversation because you'll be chatting. You'll be like, yeah. Okay, Mo, a little bit left now. No, that's too much. Or you're trying to like get into the flow and just like let your body take over and forget about like, but it makes you like really aware of the fact that you are kayaking. You can't like let your mind drift.
Yeah.
You can't enjoy this. So for me, I found it so mentally draining to be like navigating. And when I was utterly depleted towards the end, I think I probably lost my touch a little bit because, as I said, I was like probably the best navigator for a while. And then on the last crossing, or maybe the last two crossings, actually, yeah, it was like a 16-mile day where I just went for completely the wrong point, and then we had to go side onto the waves. And then on the final 40-mile crossing, we kept having to creep right to like correct, which is something that just like the mistakes I wouldn't have made before, but I just found it like so mentally taxing.
Yeah. No, I get that. I haven't obviously navigated in that kind of environment, but I've navigated a lot in pitch black without being able to use lights. And
or anything that like requires mental energy. Mental energy is finite. Like if you sprint, you will eventually have to slow down because your body has only so much physical energy. And if you exercise your mind, you eventually slows down because it's finite as well. And you can build that up through infinite experiences of adventure and stuff. But by the end of like almost 100 days out there on the last two crossings, I was just finding it really difficult. And I think I was getting worse at it because I was like, I'm not going to let this ruin it for me. So I was trying to do like juggle both balls. I was like, I'm going to stay present. I'm going to enjoy the environment. I'm going to look around, which meant that something had to give, which was the navigate. And it wasn't like a big deal. We just had to, we weren't lost. It was just like correcting a little bit. And on a 40-mile crossing, whenever he's tired, you'd rather just like go in a straight line, appear on the beach, and everybody's happy. But I was just like, I'm so tired of navigating.
Yeah, I bet. And I'm guessing you're eating fewer calories than you need. Like you're not packed 1,000 a day, but there's probably a few fewer than you need. An element of sleep deprivation as well?
There wasn't an element of that at all. I mean, there was a couple of nights where we had to do an overnighter because we knew that the weather was turning bad, so we wouldn't be able to do things. But I thought there was going to be more of an element of like smash and grab for like there's a weather window. We've got to take it, even if it's just 9 till midnight, and then there's another one at 6. So everybody get to bed, like get up early.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a very well rested expedition. We really took our sleep seriously, and I was never tired. From like a sleep point of view.
What did you learn tactically in that experience? Like, was there anything you'd do differently if you're going to do it again?
No, well, no. I think I'd take more wool clothes. So I think I suffered from the cold the least of all, and I'm better at dealing with cold than I'd say I'm in like the top percentile of people who deal with cold.
I'm jealous.
But I'm also in probably the bottom percentile of dealing with heat. Like if I was to do the marathon to Sab or something, I probably couldn't finish it. But I think part of that was because my clothes are all wool, and wool keeps you warm when it's wet, and cotton doesn't keep you warm when it's wet. And most of my clothes are wool, and I would have taken all of my clothes as wool. So even I had a wool base layer and a wool jumper, and then a cotton jumper. I would have taken just all wool. But I mean, there are things that we couldn't have done differently. Maybe in the training I would have concentrated more on like my kayaking technique, because those 3 guys are like ultra kayaking champions, and I was like a rower who joined at the last minute. And in the beginning, I was thinking I've been incredibly naive here to think that I could keep up with these guys, but it came within a few days, and then I was fine, I think. But there was always a speed discrepancy between my boat and the other boat. But then equally, me and Eileen were much quicker on land, getting ready and stuff. So I guess there was there's no solution there, because those guys would have gone faster on water, and we would have kayaked for more time because we would have been faster on land. So we both would have been faster. But on the other hand, we benefited, well, from a safety point of view, having 2 boats. They carried some of our food because we needed more food than them, but then we gave them some food at the end. So yeah, I mean, we all benefited from being part of a team, but we all had drawbacks as well. That's just part of being a team. So the problems wouldn't have been solved unless I literally changed the team. So we had people who were the same speed as kayaking and us, but the same speed as getting ready on land. Or if they changed the team, so they had faster kayakers, but people who were like the same pace as them getting ready.
Yeah. Did you change up who was in each kayak, or was it always the same?
The first night I was with Jeff on that night where we were humbled by the ice, and we were much slower than the other boat. So then we swapped, and we were still a bit slower, but Eileen was very patient with me, and after a couple of days we sped up. And then Eileen and I stayed in the boat the whole time together for the rest of the trip.
Nice. What team dynamics like over 103 days?
Well, there's highs and lows, inevitably. But it's still good. I mean, I want to do it. The camaraderie was so important to me. And I guess it's like a sort of a physical division of being in 2 different boats. It's not like ocean rowing where you're all in the same boat. So Eileen and I obviously had much more time together than I had with West or Jeff. And West and Jeff were best friends for 30 years, which adds a different dynamic, where Eileen and I just joining at the last minute together, new to it, and seeing this whole thing through like our virgin eyes together. So, there's different things that mean that there's like different dynamics, but and I read that West, in a newspaper article recently, said that something he didn't anticipate was how difficult he found dynamics with people he didn't know, because all of his other expeditions he'd been on with people who he had established relationships with. So I suppose reading that literally is something that West was dealing with. But I mean, I come out of it, and Eileen's already booking like tickets to come to Edinburgh for the Edinburgh Festival next year. Her and I, as I say, those like experiences where you're like, only we went through that together. But I think also being in a boat with somebody like I was with Eileen, like actually you physically are pulling the boat together, and that is like that's like a literal manifestation of like what I'm looking for. That if I was tired, and we wanted to go 4 miles an hour, presumably she was pulling harder on those days. And if she was tired, I was pulling harder. That's it. So it was awesome.
That's lovely. That's
But there are tensions at different points.
yeah, I bet.
And I'd say that speed tension was one that was ever present. I'm sure that those guys are very frustrated. You would be frustrated if you think you could go 4.5 miles an hour and you're going 3.5 miles an hour, because we can't go fast.
Compounded over 100 days, that's a huge difference.
But then equally, we're getting frustrated because we think we could kayak for 12 hours a day instead of 10 hours a day, because we can get ready in an hour and a half and not 3.5 hours.
Yeah, I bet. How did you change whilst you're away?
I changed I mean, during the thing, what I was experiencing was changing, because I guess I was getting to know the people better. So like inevitably your interactions change with people you know better than when they're complete strangers. And I was definitely so depleted by the end. I had like less to give, and I was a bit shorter with Eileen sometimes. But we spoke about how we're both so depleted we can't expect much from each other in terms of like
Manners.
manners. And towards the end, I became very outcome focused. In the beginning, when we were stuck for 2 weeks, every night I would go make a point just after we finished dinner and they're getting ready for bed. I would go out and stand by the shore and just look out at the sea, and I'd see whales and stuff like that. And they would often say, "Oh, you're the best whale spotter," and I'm like, "Well, I spend the time doing it." And that was part of me trying to ground myself and say, what I'm here for is immersion in nature, and look what's going on around me. I'm getting what I'm looking for already, rather than getting frustrated because we hadn't started yet.
Yeah.
So that like intrinsic value was freeing me from the disappointment of not starting.
Mm-hmm.
By the end, I was like, we've got to finish. And we're so close to the end. I know I'm here for camaraderie and I'm here for immersion in nature, but if we fail 100 miles from the end, then
is that because of the kind of the sunk cost if you've done so much, or is it kind of something else like just get me off this ice, or get me off this water? Sorry,
a combination. But it sunk cost. When I was hungry, I remember I wrote in my diary at one point, like, get me off. This is the end. I don't want to be here anymore. I just want to finish. I'm not going to quit, but I'm so over it. And then the next diary entry says, it turns out I was just hungry. I'm actually having a great time. But then also, like, I give talks and to corporates and companies and schools, and I'm hoping that business grows now because I've got this profile and this success behind me. And I became acutely aware that the success of that was like hanging on the outcome of the adventure. Sure, I could say it would be a great talk that people who hear it would understand and enjoy if I said, but I was there for camaraderie, so we didn't achieve it, so we didn't. But what I was looking for, I got. But less people would book me as a speaker if I was now 2-time world first record holder. And I felt a bit sad that that's what I was thinking of, but I was just like thinking so much about the sacrifices that my wife had made for me to be here, being at home with a 1-year-old daughter, pregnant with another one on the way. She works very, very, very hard, and it's important to her to like give opportunities that we've had growing up to from our parents to our children. And I'm like, I have to be an equal partner in this relationship. I'm so driven to be like the 50% partner, the support from my wife. I want to give the opportunities. I'm here not because I wanted to kayak. I'm here. It didn't happen in a vacuum. I'm here because my parents validated me. They came and watched my sports games. They told me what I was doing was important, and they could afford to give me the opportunities. And worst case scenario, this goes absolutely tits up, I can go home. I have a bedroom. I have a support network. All of these things. And now I've had my fun. It is time for my daughter and my next child. So with that in mind, I need to get to the end to get the most like talks and corporate gigs that I can out of this from a career perspective. So it wasn't as so in one way it felt like sort of dirty to be thinking about this from a career perspective, but it was more profound than that. I felt like,
Mm.
and I feel like a like that this was such a wonderful experience that I want my daughter to have the opportunity to experience these things. And ironically, the way to get that done is sort of to sully the end of it by becoming outcome focused.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Like that balance. Because I speak about this with people that I call adventurepreneurs, so entrepreneurs who
Yeah,
like doing
I've
cool
seen
shit in
it.
their
Yeah,
free time. So I
yeah,
talk about that with people like that a lot, and it's because the outcome is important too, and they're both just as important. Yet we find ourselves becoming outcome focused too frequently and for
hmm.
too much of a kind of percentage of our experience. So, like, I think you have to personal experience and from working with other people that those outcomes are entirely valid too. And if you want to further your career, that's fantastic because it's going to make your life better in the future. So I don't think
Yeah,
it's an entirely negative or spurious way to live.
yeah. But when we were 89 miles from the end, and we had a 40-mile crossing to go, um, we had a weather window on the Tuesday, but it wasn't ideal, so we didn't take it because we thought there was one on the Thursday. And then the weather forecast changed and said there's no other weather window for 10 days. And we had 7 days of food, and I spiraled. I was like, I'm 89 miles from the end, and we didn't take the Tuesday weather window. Like, what I've just ruined this. And I felt like I could have maybe pushed more. I was so tired that when we got it, when the alarm went off at 3 and every so, it's a bit more windy than we expected, I said, you're right, and went to sleep. And I'm like, I should have said, look guys, let's trust the weather forecast, we know that the weather's going to calm down. And I really like put it on myself that I had like chickened out again, taken the excuse, oh, the weather's in, let's go to sleep, Thursday will be fine. um, and I was so, and I had a fight with Eileen, and then she, both her and I were just like, we went to collect water, and we didn't give each other what we needed. Like I
Mm.
said something about how I should have said something, and she said something along the lines of like, well, I couldn't say anything because of X, Y, and Z. And I said, well, I'm talking about me, not about you now. And then the next day, when the weather forecast changed again, and it turned out we could go on Friday, and suddenly the tension had gone, Eileen and I were like, really sorry about yesterday. Oh, yes, so am I. Like, that wasn't me. That was completely unkind. So that was my lowest point. And that was because I just thought, I cannot believe we messed this up and it's my fault. No, it wasn't my fault, but it's nobody's fault. But yeah, that was a problem with becoming outcome based. But on the other hand, I don't know, maybe you have to be like that.
Yeah, but
I've achieved something that nobody
it's the
else has
kind of
achieved.
performance piece again. It's like to do
Yeah.
a thing
Yeah.
as well as experience a thing.
But yeah, I mean, by that point, I was thinking about it from my like supporting my
Yeah.
family like perspective, and I was like, I've completely let down my family because I was too cold to like advocate for pushing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I felt very guilty.
Well, yeah, it's so interesting. It's so interesting what you find out about yourself and the decisions you make in those kind of environments. It's really
Yeah,
interesting. Two more questions that I want to particularly ask you. First one is like, how the hell did you square that with your wife to take
yeah,
the
it's a
3 and a bit
good
months
question.
away?
As I say, I've been thinking about this since 2016, and to an extent, the Atlantic crossings even became a like stepping stone. It wasn't even like, well, when you row the Atlantic, we'll get it out of your system. Even before I started, like, when I row the Atlantic, I'll then be in a position to say, I've rowed the Atlantic, let's row the Northwest Passage.
Mm.
So it didn't come out of nowhere. And we left Hong Kong in 2021 with the idea of rowing the Northwest Passage and then starting a family after that. But COVID delayed things, and we weren't in a position to delay having a family. It would have been ridiculous. So we always knew that this was coming. And my wife, so that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect is that my wife is just a great, great person who's incredibly supportive, and has every right to hold this over my head for the rest of her life. But like, it's done now. And also beyond that, like the support network, who were my friends and her family and my family, who say who say and mean and do say, I can come and help if you need to go, if you want to go out for drinks with the girls, we will come and watch your daughter for the night. Or my in-laws come down once a month each, the mum and Sophie's mum and Sophie's dad, and babysit on Fridays. And there's all these sort of things, which mean that it was an absolute village who helped me. But at the centre of that village is Sophie, who the BBC called her a hero when they interviewed me. But I thought they were calling me a hero, so I tried to like modestly scoff. Oh, right, not a hero. Then I realised what they were saying. And I was like, it looked like I go, she's no hero. I was like, no, I mean, she is a hero. Let's not get carried away.
She didn't kayak at all.
Oh, well, first, yeah, but she's a trooper. So yeah, it's credit with her because she's incredible, and because this has been in the pipeline for a very, very, very long time.
And then the final thing, you mentioned your dad a couple of times. What kind of example was he growing up?
And so my dad was a proper explorer. He mapped part of Greenland, mapped part of Patagonia, first person to walk north to south of the Patagonia ice cap.
Wow.
These kind of things, which shows how old he is, that there was like actual areas that he'd mapping. And by osmosis, I got into the outdoors because he was in the outdoors. We'd go hiking on a Sunday and we'd come back and have pancakes, or our holidays were like camping trips and that kind of stuff. But in terms of these kind of adventures, my one, I guess, having a parallel to his ones, like, we knew about them. I guess as kids, we were most interested in the Everest one because you know what Everest is. But it wasn't like Dad telling yarns at the table or anything like that. It wasn't like I was into rugby and my dad would come and watch rugby. He wouldn't, it wasn't like a massive part. But my mum, also legitimately an adventurer, I moved to Australia in her 20s and then spent 4 years like traveling overland back to the UK, which a woman in her 20s, like going through Afghanistan in the 1970s. She tells stories. She's where all me and my siblings get our like storytelling from, and would always say, well, what are you going to tell your grandkids? What are you going to tell your grandkids? Oh yeah, he's got a great career, but is he going to have stories for his grandkids? And I always thought about making that like the title of my book. It's definitely going to be one of the chapter titles because like my mum made such a point of it. Sending us off like, you're going to go do something interesting this summer because you need stories for your grandkids, which I've now got this like pathological desire to like, I need stories for the grandkids. What am I doing relaxing on a Sunday? I can't tell my grandkids about this. But so it's, I guess like it was more my mum that was sort of like an overt inspiration. But now that I'm older and I'm doing these things, and I definitely can relate to my dad, and we have great conversations about it in a different way, which he knows, even as simple as knowing that even though I explained the perspective thing about seeing polar bears and turning out to be seagulls, it's difficult for anybody who hasn't seen it to picture, but I know my dad can picture it. So there's like an aspect of being able to relate to each other, which is fantastic.
Nice, man. I think that's a lovely place to wrap up. Where can people follow your work? When's the book coming out? Give us a plug.
Well, I've got you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Adventure Agnew, and also on LinkedIn, Mark Agnew. I do a lot on there. And the book, I've got a few publishers interested, and we're talking at the moment, so nothing's concrete about when the book will come out or what it will look like. But I've got another book as well called Stay Ventures, which is about big expeditions, but in the UK. Nice. I'm trying to make the point that it doesn't have to be micro and domestic or big and abroad. You can do big and domestic. If you kayak the whole way around the British mainland, you're actually kayaking further than the entire Northwest Passage.
Nice. Or so swim it like Ross Edgley did, which is insane.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, I've been trying to make the point that it's about imagination as well. Like Land's End to John O'Groats, I've interviewed somebody who's run it, walked it, cycled it, and rode a horse. Like you can do whatever you want in the UK as long as you have the wherefore. So those two things are in the pipeline, but we'll see as to when they come out.
Fantastic, dude. Thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thank you very much for having me.